Hey guys, Dan Bradbury here. Super excited to have a special guest. In a moment, I am going to introduce you to Nick Bolton. Nick built his training company, his coaching business. He started it in 2008 and he scaled it to being the market leader in the UK. I believe it's actually the biggest in the UK, but I'll ask Nick to confirm or deny that. Unusual achievement in that he scaled it and it's not dependent upon him. So much so that he's actually lives a nomadic lifestyle 9 months of the year, and he's emigrated to his expat living in Dubai for 3 months of the year. There's a lot of lessons because I've seen Nick along that entire journey from the earliest days of his business up until where he's at today, which is, well, let's just say profit beyond the level that most people dream of. So with all that said, Mr. Nick Bolton, welcome.
Thank you so much, Dan. Nice to be here.
So Nick, it's fascinating. Again, obviously, you and I have a background in coaching and training, and I'm going to try hard not to geek out on that and keep this relevant for all types of business owners. But as I kind of alluded to, you're too modest to say it to yourself. I think it's 94% of businesses in the UK never get to seven-figure revenues. And, you know, you some time ago got to seven-figure profits. And not that it's all been plain sailing. There's been plenty of highs and lows, some of which we'll touch on. But I'm curious, did you always envisage it in the classic kind of life coachy way? Did you always envisage being, you know, one of, if not the largest training provider in the UK? Or did it kind of happen accidentally? Or did it just kind of organically grow? What was your mindset when you set the business up, and how has that evolved over time?
Very interesting question. I feel like it's somewhere in between. I didn't assume I would be the biggest. And I didn't intend to be the biggest. I don't think I am the biggest, by the way. But it was never I didn't really think of myself in comparison with others. I just wanted to do the best that I could do with what I was building. And I think that was more the critical thing for me. So I didn't start off going, let's just see what happens. I wanted to be the very best of what I could achieve, but I didn't treat that as a comparison with any other school. I didn't ever think I'd be one of the largest. I mean, I certainly am one of the largest, and that's great because it means we have a bigger impact, but it wasn't my intention for sure. I loved, for me, Dan, I'm sure you feel the same. I just love what I do as an entrepreneur. And so you sort of plow the field every day, night and day, for the love of it. And of course, if you do that long enough, it has the right results. So it certainly wasn't what was my intention though, after I read The E-Myth by Michael Gerber, my intention was to de-nick it. Like I never based my business on me as an individual or on my brand. That's why I never called it the Nick Bolton School of Coaching. It was always something that was separate from me. That was very intentional because I always knew I wanted to have freedom. Freedom was always my top value. And I felt like if I tied it to me, I'd be tied down. And so that was something I avoided from day one, really.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, because I remember a dialogue we had it was probably 2010 or somewhere around there, but put it this way, long enough ago that longer than either of us would care to remember, when you said you weren't quite at seven-figure revenues yet. And you said, I've got a goal to hit. I want to get seven-figure revenues. And we had it wasn't an argument, but we had a disagreement, a difference of opinion in front of the whole mastermind. And I was saying, you don't want seven-figure revenues. You don't want seven-figure revenues. That's not the goal. More turnover is vanity. And you were like, yeah, but I would just quite like to. And so I remember that dialogue, but I always remember that you were unusual in marking out the business not being dependent upon you. So yeah. I'm curious. As you think back now, what were some moments or inflection points for Animas? What were any particular moments because people think that it's linear, you do it long enough and it just grows in a straight line up. But in reality, it's never that. It's often flat, goes up, flat, goes up. And occasionally there's declines or decreases when things happen, like the pandemic, of course, if you're doing in-person training. What were some of the critical inflection points in the company's history?
So I would say there are two kinds of inflection points. There's the inflection point around me stepping out of it in the long term, and there's inflection points around its success. And they're sort of two different things, although related. So for instance, one of the inflection points around its success was when I joined your private mastermind, and I brought my P&L and my balance sheet, and it was when I look back at them now, the numbers are very funny. It was like minus 5,000 profit one month and plus 20,000 the next. And I thought plus 20,000 was really good. And I remember you saying something along the lines of, if we take the best revenue and the best expenses or the least expenses each month, how do we get you to 20,000 every month? And it was such a simple vision. That was an inflection point because I realized me accepting minus 5,000 in a given month wasn't okay. It was like, it wasn't okay to be so sort of gung-ho about it and so passive about it. I had to be more intentional around the numbers. So you definitely helped me get to grips with the numbers, how money flows through the business. So that was one inflection point. That was really, really critical. In fact, I would say me understanding numbers was one of the big moments in the journey of Animas, really. The other inflection points were as I began to replace myself. So when I first started it, I did, like we all do, we do all the training, we do all the bookkeeping, we do all the sales, we do all the everything. And then I remember one of my students was very competent as a coach. And I said, oh, would you like to train for us? Or for me. And she did. And that was my first moment of going, whoa, I'm not in the classroom every weekend anymore. That was nice. And then employing my first actual team member with PAYE and, all that sort of stuff, and becoming an employer for the first time and thinking, right, I don't need to do that bit anymore. And I would say that probably the biggest inflection point, Dan, was a mental shift that I'd already made, but I crystallized it in a given moment, which was I used to do the free introduction days where I'd stand in front of the prospects and talk about coaching and sell the course. And I was really good at it, but I was sick and tired of doing it every weekend, every Saturday. And I went into one of these ITCs, as we called it. And I said, good morning, everyone. Just to let you know, you're the very last group I will ever do this to. This is the last time I'm ever going to do one of these. And I remember one of my employees was sitting at the front of the room and she looked in the horror, like, what are you talking about? And then afterwards she said, but Nick, nobody can do it as well as you can do it. Like, we can't replace you. And I said, well, if we can't replace me, then I've got a broken business. And I think when I said that, it made me realize just how much I believed in the idea that I was utterly replaceable as an individual. Like, there's nothing I hang on to about myself that makes me irreplaceable. Nothing. I could replace myself at every level, including the intellectual level, which I still am the leader of, if you like. But I don't see the intellectual part coming from me. I just happen to be the custodian of it right now. And I can definitely see myself just being negated at every level, in the ultimate long run.
See, this is fascinating. And one branch that we're going to come back to is about AI and the replacing of people of AI and the impact that has. But I do acknowledge, again, I remember a time you had a little bit of a reputation in the kind of the boardroom sessions of being very willing to let go of people, team members, when it wasn't working. Because obviously when businesses get to multiple seven figures revenue and they build out teams, it's amazing that how long sometimes people hang on to team members, even when it's clearly demonstrably not working. And we always used to chuckle because it felt for a period of time like your advice to everybody was like, why the hell are you tolerating this? Just axe them, get rid of them.
Yeah.
And not in a disrespectful or derogatory way, to be clear, but in the sense of it was very clear how you came across that it's like, no, you need to separate this. This is not working. Follow the appropriate laws, protocol, etc. Be generous even with severance, but it's like this business is not going to shift unless you shift and are willing to let go of these attachments to people that aren't very good at their jobs.
Yeah.
So I love that outline. And what were some of the trickiest points? Because in a sense, Nick, if I'm listening to this, I could say it sounds like it's been plain sailing. Like you set it up, you read the E-Myth, you realize I needed to be fired, I removed it out. Oftentimes, some of the biggest growth comes from times of difficulty or times of loss or times of crisis. What were on this journey from inception to very large, very stable, secure, successful by any demonstrable metric company? What were the tricky times that come to mind?
Do you know, it's funny. I'm probably going to say something completely the opposite of what you might expect, which is that the most tricky time was our most successful time, which was
interesting. How so?
Yeah, during COVID, we absolutely exploded because, of course, we went online like a lot of training companies and people were at home with nothing to do. So they all started joining us. And then we had to increase our faculty. And it was our best year ever financially. Even to this date, it's our best year ever. Maybe not compared to this year coming, but nonetheless. But we lost sight of our values. We lost sight of what we stood for because we were growing way too fast. We didn't creak at the joints operationally, but we creaked at the joints from a values perspective and a who are we perspective. And then that was in 2020. And then in 2021, I guess the market began to go back to normal and we were left with loads of faculty and And I remember that was the year I was still living on my boat at the time, living on my canal boat. That was the year that I went, whoa, something's broken. And I went back to Animas and I had to get rid of a lot of people who've been with me for a long time who, they were really the figureheads of the company. But I was like, this isn't working and you're not shifting. And I had to rebuild Animas from a value values perspective. And I sort of said, right, we were taking maybe 80 students a month. And I said, right, we're going to cut back to 36. It was that was huge, but we put the price up because we wanted to get the course better. So we went back to what do we really stand for? And it's funny how quickly you can lose yourself when it gets a life of its own. Do you know what I mean?
Well, look, I want to dive into this a little bit because it's funny about how you looked at it. Because of course, for anybody listening to this in the broader business sense, a lot of people had the experience of COVID, lockdown, people adjusted business models, lost overhead or cost because there was all the bounce back loans. All of a sudden, there was a lot more money in the market that people were looking to spend, and therefore businesses' revenues went up, but the cost went down. So their profits exploded. And then, of course, Nick, I was speaking to him just the other week that the business is 3 times the size as it was now at the start of 2020, but the profit is the same. It's identical. And because, of course, what's happened is they had the big spike, but then the money's dried up. So customer acquisition costs have gone up. It's harder to get new customers. But meanwhile, they've gone, it's going to carry on this way. So therefore, they had excessive overheads versus their revenue. And they're not willing to let go of the revenue. So it's interesting to me. So I want to push into, you thought about it from a values perspective. Because some would go, no, you just look at it and go, no, you need to adapt your overhead for how the market's reacting. You need to just lose cost and purely look at it from a financial analytical point of view. But I do remember yours was a much deeper, because we were all shocked in your group. We were shocked when you were like, okay, I'm going to come back, because you had somebody running the company. You had somebody that was the head, the face of the company, the customer face, if you will, or customer facing. And you basically, like I said, numerous people went, and we were shocked because the company was still making, by most people's standards, an extremely generous amount of money while you were at the time traveling up and down on your canal boat, which you had built. Tell me about how you thought through the values perspective and why that was the way to do it, why it wasn't just, the costs have got wrong, or sure, this is the wrong member team. Give me a bit more.
I remember when I was living on my boat, it was working very well in terms of the business, but I felt nothing about it. It was like Neo watching the numbers on the screen.
In Matrix, yeah.
It meant nothing to me. And I realized, wow, I've just broken the £1 million profit, but I don't feel anything. And that's because it wasn't what I intended to build. It wasn't speaking to my values. And so it wasn't really a rational thing. It was a gut thing. I just knew that something was broken in terms of my connection to the business. And so the only way I could fix it was to go back and get in tune with what I really, really wanted the business to be and what was enough for me financially. Like, we definitely went down a lot in profit the next year, but I'm okay with that. There's only so much money you need. Well, for me, I felt there was only so much money I need. I had to be okay with what I was doing. Was this business representing what I really believe about coaching? Was it representing what I believe about what training should look like? And so on and so on. That felt way more important to me than just money in the bank. Because for me, with a pretty frugal lifestyle, there's a point where money means nothing, I don't buy. When I went to Dubai, I looked at a Ferrari and I thought, why am I looking at a Ferrari? I'm going to get an Uber. Like, I'm not going to drive a Ferrari around Dubai, especially when I only live there 3 months of the year. So I sort of live a very realistic lifestyle, and therefore money is not a huge thing for me. But even if it was, I think I would still take the action I did, because even more important to me is like alignment. Is what I'm building in alignment with my values and my beliefs and that sort of thing. Well, the other thing I'd say, Dan, is I'm very, very adaptable and I move very quickly. It doesn't take much for me to respond to what I'm seeing in front of me. And so I'm very good at saying, that's not working, let me fix it. I remember you saying, you get what you tolerate. And one of my sort of thoughts has always been, wow, how do people live with the same problem for so long? Right. So if I identify a problem in my life, whether it's me or my business or a relationship, I aim to not have that problem pretty quickly. And that was the situation with that, really. I just knew something wasn't right.
Yeah, it's interesting. I said to you off camera, but for the guys listening, Nick and I have spoken, but he's not been in a boardroom session for a few years. But by coincidence, I happened to be coaching 2 of Nick's former boardroom buddies earlier today. And they all had fond memories because they both spoke to the fact that you were not afraid. Or one person said, I think it was Alan, who said that, Nick had no problem just saying, listen, mate, you're talking a bunch of shit, or words to that effect. I mean, that's probably not your language, that was Alan's, but that tone of kind of going, what are you doing? So he said there was no niceties, but he meant it in an endearing way. It was like you knew from Nick, you were getting your truth. You were leaning into, listen, I think you're crazy. And often you were right. And so when you did cut out a significant part of the team and take a drop in the profit, I've seen you do that more than once over your journey, but then it's come back stronger. And most people aren't willing to do that. So what would you say, Nick, to somebody there's people listening to this who they know that they need to change something? whether it be business model, whether it be an employee, a team member, but there's often fear attached to it, because you said it relatively light. It's like, okay, I was okay with a profit going down. Some people don't feel like they've got the margin. They can't afford for the profit to go down. What would you say to those people? I'm curious.
Yeah. So my company, Animas, it actually means something. Animas means anima is life and animus is courage. And it's to live life courageously. But the courage is not bungee jumping or something. It's to face the truth as it is. And then to own your part of what you can do about it. That's what it means. So if somebody's margins are a problem, that's part of the truth. Like I was okay because it wasn't part of my truth. My profit was pure excess, really, in a sense. But if that is part of somebody's thing, that's part of the truth they've got to figure out and they've got to strategize around it. But that's not a reason not to take action. So the first step is to get super, super clear on what is the problem and what are the parameters of that problem that you've got to deal with. But then deal with it. Don't just kind of sit there moping and, say, I wish I could do something.
I'll say it on the record. You definitely probably get the record in our community, Nick, for being fearless, for taking decisions, and definitely for acting quickly. You often took the rest of the group members, even me, who I'm quite propensity for quick action, I believe, but you definitely get the record. How does this correlate, Nick? There's a couple of things I want to touch on. I'm conscious of time. The entrepreneurial curse, as in you've created a life now that you designed, that you crafted, you want to travel, your freedom being your highest value. Again, you're being nomadic, and the group members, we often discuss you and seeing on your journeys of where you are in the world, whether you're in Vietnam, whether in the Far East, whether you're going to Borneo or wherever in the world you are, or some of your cycle trips across countries, in fact across continents. It's inspiring to see, even though I don't want to join you on any of those cycle trips. That's not my journey, but it's inspiring to see you following what you see as being true. How do you correlate? Entrepreneurs as a breed typically have got aspirational, because you also said, I got to 7-figure profits, but I felt nothing. So there's this happiness piece, but there's this success piece. How do you connect those two, or not, as the case may be?
Oh, that's a big question. Let me try to answer it a little bit.
Summarize philosophy for me, if you could.
I don't know if you remember this, Dan, but I used to say that I'm not an entrepreneur because entrepreneurs are looking for the next opportunity they can maximize in some way. I'm not a businessman because that's primarily somebody that kind of manages a system and thinks about numbers. I'm a business artist. That's how I used to describe myself. And I do feel that's the reality. Like I see Animas as a work of art that I'm always creating in line with my vision. And the numbers don't matter so much to me as is this in alignment with the vision I'm trying to create. And so as I've kind of moved away from Animas, in some ways I've been able to do more of that because I'm less involved in the operations of what makes the business work. I'm now thinking, how does Animas show up in the world? And so I've been writing a lot more stuff. I've just written another book on coaching supervision. And it's really beautiful that I can give my time to the creative side of what makes Animas different in the world. And that actually goes hand in hand with my new lifestyle because it's so easy to, when you're traveling a lot, just to spend time writing or thinking or making videos or that sort of thing. What we spoke about just off camera before we started was the entrepreneurial curse. But funny enough, the entrepreneurial curse for me is not quite what it is for other people. I think for a lot of entrepreneurs, once they build something, they want to build something bigger and bigger. That isn't it for me. I actually don't have any desire to build another business. Every time I think of a new idea or somebody gives me an idea, I think, I really don't want to do it. You're like starting from zero and all the kind of malarkey you have to go through. I really don't feel like that at all. My entrepreneurial curse is more like a human curse, and it's like I'm never satisfied. But I think that's more of an existential thing. I want to be by myself and I want to be single and free. That comes with loneliness. So then you start to think about how do I maybe get together with somebody, but then I know in the long run, having been married 3 times, that's going to end in the same way. So I avoid it. So I've got this tension. That's nothing to do with the business journey. That's more to do with me as a human being and facing existential norms of being in the world, and trying to figure out what's going to make. And I don't think there is a solution for me. I don't think there's something that I will build that will make me happy all the time.
Right,
it's just my natural state is to be kind of like, now what? But it's not about business. It's more something else. I'm not sure what it is.
Yeah, life. Yeah, and the tension. Interesting. So I'm going to take a hard left, if that's okay. Let's talk about tax, or let's talk about lifestyle. I suppose it relates to tax. So I didn't ask you permission for the story, but I'll edit it out if you don't want it. So I remember when you were making up, for many years you've been making a lot of money. You wanted to buy a flat in London. So I suppose in a sense it's a transition out of the UK. You were going to buy a flat in London and you're going to pay, a pretty hefty price for this flat. And then you suddenly realized that most people 800,000, whatever it was for this flat, but then suddenly you realize you're going to have a 500 grand tax bill because the company had the money. You could have dividended it to yourself that day and you didn't want a mortgage. So you're buying it for cash. But then all of a sudden you realize that actually the sticker price is 800 grand, but it's going to cost me 1.3 million. This is crazy. Now, tell me about that and how that triggered you seeking and exploring, like I said, now being resident in Dubai.
Yeah, I won't bore you with the whole story. It's a little bit more complicated than that. What happened is at the start of 2023, I realized I wanted to be single again. I was married, still love my wife. She's a beautiful woman, but I just felt like I needed my freedom. We had that conversation. She was upset, but she understood. We had already started a purchase of this apartment and we were going to have a mortgage. But once I realized that we weren't going to do it together, I said to the bank, hey, I need to stop the mortgage. Can I get one in my own name quickly enough? And they said no. So I thought, right, I'm going to have to take the money out of the business, put it in. And then I thought, God, unless I treat that as a director's loan, it's going to be a 500k tax bill on top of that. That's so unacceptable to me. And then I suddenly thought, hold on, you're a free man, you're single, you have no attachments to the UK. I read this book, Nomad Capitalism, or Nomad Capitalist, years ago by Andrew Henderson.
Yeah, Andrew Henderson, yeah.
And I thought, now is my time. And without even thinking about it, as in like I could have gone to Paraguay and done residency there or whatever. I didn't. I remember you actually saying to me, Nick, why Dubai? And I thought, because it's there. Like I didn't bother doing the research. I just knew Dubai was perfectly adequate for me. So I went to Dubai and went there for 10 days. And on the last day of that trip, I bought an apartment there. I literally went and put down a deposit on an apartment. And I just knew that Dubai was going to be fine for me. And I also remember you, Dan, saying to me, because the money would stack up and stack up and stack up in the business. And you said, well, you've got to take it one day, Nick. You might as well pay tax on it. I'm so glad for once in my life I didn't listen to you. Because, of course, once I got to Dubai, I could take the whole lot tax-free.
Tax-free, yeah, right.
As long as I don't go back to live in the UK in the next 5 years. And that was amazing. That was absolutely life-changing. Because you always said to me, Nick, you've got to build your personal balance sheet, which was basically empty for most of my life. And now it's not empty.
It was all tied up in the business, yeah.
Exactly. And now it's not empty. Now it's in my name. And that was an amazing move to Dubai. And then I started thinking about, well, what about the businesses? And so I moved them to the US as LLCs, which are pass-through companies. I did a lot of research into the VAT side and realized you don't need to pay VAT if it's an education company that's got both live training and virtual, that doesn't require you to pay VAT to the UK. And all of a sudden it's like, whoa, this is like the best of all worlds. So it was just an amazing, I've got to say, that was just an incredibly freeing moment to not have to think about tax again, you know?
Yeah, and again, I know you're comfortable, Nick, but just for those listening here, there's a danger of suddenly, this is not tax advice from us, clearly. You need to do your research, and Nick, you were and are super diligent. And, we've had, as you know, I've had other clients as well, people like Paul Goff, who went and became resident in the United States, and different places have different rules. So I want to be explicit for everybody. No, there's no advocacy for avoiding the rules. You've got to be compliant with the rules. But understanding that there's different rules in different places, and therefore, if you understand the rules, play by the rules of the game, but it can be significantly advantageous depending on where you live and where your company's set up, and there's 1,000 nuances in between. Like you said, it's fascinating you being in Dubai, and everyone goes, oh, Dubai's no tax. Well, that's not universally true, and not true at a corporate level. And I know, you pay tax at whatever, 9%, I think it is. But it's how it's transformational. If somebody's thinking about this for your business, imagine if you kept your prices the same, as in how much the customer pays you, but all of a sudden you didn't have to hand over the VAT. And again, HMRC inspectors listening, I'm not saying pretend you're charging VAT and then don't hand it over. What I'm saying is, if you're charging £5,000 plus VAT, i.e. £6,000 for something, what if you kept the price at £6,000 so the customer pays £6,000, but now all of a sudden there's an extra £1,000 of margin on it? It becomes can become transformational if you're willing to pay the price.
Well, let me say something else. But yeah, you're absolutely right, Dan. I'm lucky because I've got no kids and I was single and all that kind of stuff. But let me say something else on that, because I was talking to one of my friends who runs a similar company to me, a lot smaller. And I said, the VAT you save could double your profit, because your profit margin might be, say, £1,000, and the VAT you save is £1,000. Now you're making £2,000 profit. You've made 100% increase in your profit, not the 20% you think you might be saving. It's mind blowing how different it can be.
Right, and people don't think about it. A bit like they go, "Oh, we buy the flat. I'm paying £800,000 for a property that might go up in value over time," and it's like, yeah, but it's not cost you £800,000. Whereas if you bought an £800,000 property in Dubai. And again, we're not getting for rates of growth in different locations, but it's amazing how people will, if you ask somebody, are they willing to question what they believe to be true or prove what they say is true? Everyone gets busy reinforcing their own truth rather than just kind of going, no, actually, what if I assume is wrong? And so I alluded to then the price that's got to be paid. It's like, well, okay, the price that's got to be paid is, are you willing to incorporate in another country? Are you willing, in simple terms, to take up tax residency in another country? And like you said, in your case, works for you. For me, as a father of three kids and et cetera, half with me, half with their mother, it's like, doesn't work for me at this stage. But who knows when the kids are grown and gone? So it's fascinating. So last topic I want to make sure we touch on is AI. So you said to me that the company has developed and grown, and you're on track for your best year ever, surpassing the 2020 high, and yet the team size has shrunk significantly. Why is that?
Well, so you got to bear in mind two things there. We can have the best year because we're no longer paying corporation tax and VAT. So the company is like a gem now to me. Like before, it was like a messy coal mine, dirty and messy, and you had to dig, and it's like come out covered in dust. Now, like you go into this mine, you pick out the beautiful diamond. That's how Animas is to me now. It's much smaller. We take less students. We have they pay more, so they're more committed to the journey. The course is better. Everything about it is more beautiful, but it's more profitable because we're not paying VAT and tax. And I know that there might be people who have sort of moral qualms about that and all that sort of stuff, but that's the way it is. The other part of it, as you're alluding to, is the AI, which has just been, for me, mind-blowing over the last year and a half. I just can't get over how much it's changed my life personally, but also the business. And I wrote an email to my team saying, look, my desire is not to let anyone go, but the fact is AI is coming down the track. And if you don't make yourself AI ready, at some point you will go. So I'm giving you advance warning to start to educate yourself. You've got a genius that lives with you 24/7, sitting next to you, free of charge. Use that genius to do your job better, to come up with new ideas for your job. And it's amazing how many people just don't do it. And I keep saying, don't be a button pusher. We don't need button pushers anymore. Button pushers are gone. And I've had to let people go because they're just not adapting to the new world and they're not adding value anymore. And so we get stuff done way quicker, way better, and without people messing it up, and it's just a sad reality. I don't like it because I went to the Philippines, I met my team. And of course you get to know them as human beings and what our jobs do for them as human beings. But it's like, we're also not a charity. We have to run a business at its optimal best. And so AI is absolutely changing the game for us in so many ways.
I love this. So one final bonus question is, you have an MD or somebody that runs your business day to day. How did you do that? So there's a lot of people listening going, oh, this is great. Nick said a lot of things and stuff about tax, but they're saying, look, I'm in a business model and maybe they're selling a product or maybe they're providing a service and they're not doing the service, but they are the managing director or the CEO of the company. You don't do that. How did you do that transition?
Well, it's been a long journey and the thing about me, Dan, is I take risks and I don't worry too much about the outcome. As in, I don't fear the outcome. I know that I can deal with the outcome. And so I experiment, and I've got the experiments wrong and I've got the experiments right. And so I've tried an MD and I've tried a CEO and I've tried a thought leader CEO, somebody to completely replace me. Where I've ended up is like an operational COO. So Ruth is now a COO and I make all the strategic decisions. I build the vision. She talks to me pretty much daily about the operational side, and my job
in the business.
And my job is to go, here's where I want to go. How do we get there? And then her job is to operationalize that. And that's been the most perfect combination. It's like if I give away too much of the vision and it goes off track. It's like, why are we talking about that? That's nothing to do with us. It's so weird sometimes what people do. And so I've learned what I need to hold on to and what I need to give away. That's fundamentally it. But the other part of it is the mindset thing of just like, stop thinking you're so important and stop thinking you're so good and irreplaceable, and recognize that if somebody can do what you do reasonably well, it's probably a good idea they do it and not you. If you want to be free.
I love this conversation, Nick. I hope everybody's taking lots of notes. And I've not asked Nick, but if you're lobbying me enough and you want me to try and persuade Nick to come back on, ask him more questions, I'd love to, but I want to be respectful of your time. Nick, if somebody's listening to this and they want to find out about you or they want to find out about Animas, what should they search for or where should they go?
Sure, animascoaching.com. So if they're interested in being a coach, animascoaching.com. If they want to find out about me, the only place really is LinkedIn. So they can go to LinkedIn, just search Nick S. Bolton.
Well, I'm sure we can put a link in the show notes. Mr. Bolton, it's always a pleasure. And again, I love this. I often say you are the best example of somebody who's exited your business, not in terms of selling the company, but in terms of removing yourself, only holding on to the bits that you absolutely love, and living your best lives. Congratulations, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you.